Don't try to hide your flaws with gimmicks to bring people to church. You need to use your flaws to find people who will come to your church despite that, or who will even love your church because of your flaws. And a lot of churches will think, well, we got to hide our flaws. This isn't good, so we can't promote it, right? On the other hand, the world is saying, come to karaoke. We don't got good singers. We don't got good mixes, but we got good community. We got a lot of fun. Maybe we got good drinks, good food. And people love going to karaoke. Karaoke is growing. We not only have karaoke bars, we've got karaoke's on cruises. I was at a conference that had karaoke last weekend, like a karaoke networking night. Even bar in our town have like 1 or 2 nights dedicated to karaoke. And you don't go to karaoke for the professional music and professional production. You go because it's a good time. And part of what makes it good is the lack of professionalism, right? And when there is like someone that's a really good singer or a really good stage presence, it makes it more fun, but it's not fun because someone's a bad singer, right? In the same way, right? A lot of pastors I talk to feel ashamed because of their flaws. We're small. We don't have a paved parking lot. We don't have a good building. Our carpet's stained. We don't have good sound. We don't have a kids ministry, right? If you try to cover those flaws by finding ways to hook people and bring them in, you're going to risk a couple things. Number one, if you just focus on the gimmicks, what's going to bring people in? Then you're basically focusing on shallowness, and you're going to get shallow results, which is why a lot of churches, their advisory boards, the elder boards, one of the worst things you can ask is, what's going to get the young people in? That's the same question that worldly businesses are using, and they're really good at getting kids in, but they're not really good at getting kids in for the right reasons. So the question really isn't what can we do to get kids in. The real question is, what can we do to initiate a relationship to share the gospel and make disciples of these students in our community, right? If you stop at just what's going to hook people and get them in, that's a gimmick, right? If you actually go deeper than that and really say, what's our mission and how can we get people to be involved in our mission, that's not gimmick, that's mission-driven decision-making. That's really the only difference. A gimmick is just shallow, right? But intentionally doing something to capture attention, point it to Christ, and make a disciple with that relationship, that's actual mission-driven decision-making, okay? So don't look at gimmicks like, for example, free pizza at youth basketball night. That can be a gimmick if you're just like, hey, let's get pizza and the kids will come. Number one, the kids don't just come for free pizza anymore. Pizza's a dime a dozen now. It used to be something special. Now it's not, okay? But if you just say free pizza coming in, right? That's a gimmick. We're going to have the world's tallest clown at Easter. What does that have to do with making disciples? And Christians see this. The world sees it. What does this have to do with why you're here? You're just a program now. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. Not only that, if you try to use gimmicks to get people to come in, you risk creating a false representation of who you really are. And we really especially see this. The greatest pastors I know, in fact, you even too maybe, use some kind of tactic or gimmick to get people to come to church for an event or some kind of service, some kind of special occasion or holiday, and you never see them come back. Or maybe you see them come back one time. I hear this a lot, right? We tried Facebook ads and people came, but then they started to dwindle off. Because you're putting on this production and you're doing this one-time thing and you're saying, hey, here we are, this one time, and then you go back to just being normal. Now, I'm not saying you can't put on special productions, but I'm saying you have to manage expectations when you do. Because if you don't, you create a feeling of deception among the people that are coming to you. This is why we don't put stock photos on the website. We want to use pictures of your people, even low-quality ones, because they need to see the real you. If we see a beautiful, diverse family, but we go there and you're just a bunch of old whiteheads, right? That's a miscommunication, okay? That's a misrepresentation. Now, we can talk about how you'll get to that point where you do have that diversity, even though you're an older, aging, single demographic church. There's ways to get there, right? Nothing's impossible with God, but you can't fake it till you make it. You can't just sit there and just say, oh, you know what? We're going to start acting like a church with a giant kids ministry when you ain't even got one Sunday school teacher. Okay, you can't fake it till you make it. And I think that's where a lot of churches get themselves in trouble and say, well, how can we reach younger people if we don't have a children's ministry for their kids? I'm going to answer that question. I'm actually going to answer it now. I don't want to follow my notes here. So how would you do that? You got to look at your flaws and turn them into strengths. So instead of saying, how are we going to get young couples in here with young families in here when we don't have a kids ministry? You got to flip the script and instead ask, what kind of young family would come here even though we don't have a kids ministry? What kind of young family would come here and love the fact that we don't have a kids ministry? And then look at your community and say, okay, this is what we need. Just some examples of things that I've seen work. Number one, you look for people that like starting things, right? There are people like me. I love starting things. I love building programs up. Even if I come in right at the beginning, I want to be on that launch team, right? And there are people out there that would love, there are parents out there that would love to help you start a children's ministry. Treat it like you're planting a church and get a launch team. You can start your children's ministry that way. Maybe not only that, maybe there are parents out there, for example, I'm just thinking a few homeschool parents that would much rather attend worship service with their children than send their children off to another place on a Sunday morning. In fact, I know I'm unique. I'm the opposite of my wife. I love it when kids run around worship service and play and fool around. And yeah, it's distracting sometimes, but it's good that we got young blood here. Right? It's like when I get so annoyed with now I'm doing a simile and simile. It's like when I get annoyed with my daughter and my dad just laughs, right? Because it reminds him of the younger days. It makes him feel young. It makes me realize that we've got a generation that we're bringing up and we're showing them the right path. My wife's the opposite. She gets distracted easily and she's like, I can't pay attention when these kids crying. But there are people in your community that would love to have worship with your children. Being present, being discipled, being molded, seeing what it's like to be a mature Christian, rather than just going off into another room to be babysat with Jesus. So turn your flaws into your strengths. But not only that, look at who you're serving now. Look, despite your flaws, you've still got dozens, hundreds, I doubt thousands. Big churches don't need to watch this show, but hey, great if you are. You've got people that you're serving effectively right now, despite your flaws. And when I ask a question, tell me about your church, I always get, we're a diverse group of people. We've got all different kinds of people in our church. Again, you're stopping at the surface level. If you go deeper, you'll stop seeing the differences and start seeing the similarities. All right? Stop looking at what makes your congregation different from one another and start looking at what they all have in common. You know what? All of our congregation, they love how this is a place not to be judged. Okay, great. Who's looking for a place to no longer be lonely and no longer be judged? That might be who your church needs to reach out to and is effectively equipped and gifted to reach out to. You know, our congregation, we're a bunch of introverts. Great. Go reach the other introverts. We don't do programs. We don't do special events. We don't do greeters. A lot of pastors would be like, that scares me to have a church like that. But there are some churches out there, I can think of one right now in Arkansas, and that's them to a T. And the introverts know, if I'm going to go to church, I'm going to go to that church because they don't shake my hand. They don't say hello. They don't make me go to a connection center. And when we do have events, I don't have to talk to other people. And if you're extrovert or if I would even say normal, you don't understand that, but you can be alone. You can be in a group and not feel lonely, even if you're not talking to people. And as a bonus here, if you do want to reach more people, this is almost turning into like a ministry segment instead of a marketing segment. But if you do want to reach more people, I'll wrap it into marketing in a second. If you do want to reach new kinds of people, think about the kind of person that your existing congregation can then reach out to. So, for example, another flaw is we're just an old church. We're all over 60. There are young Gen Z, millennials, even Gen Xers that want to be around that wisdom. I like to say that they were born in the wrong generation. There are dozens of us. And you're trying to chase the people that want to be young and stay around young when there are others that want to be around wisdom, that want to be around people that won't let them down, want to be around a generation that keeps their word, want to be around a generation that lived the good old days and knows the wisdom to pass on. There are people like that, but you're ignoring them because you're trying to be like other churches. Okay. And by the way, our perfect invite system works for this. I guess it's not a system, it's a framework. Our perfect invite framework works around this by looking at your existing congregation and saying, what is the one thing, the commonality that this congregation comes to this church, and what is keeping our community up at night? The people we want to reach, what's causing them to lose sleep? What's causing their heart to drop every time they're afraid their wife is going to ask them this question, or their spouse or their husband is going to ask them this question? You find those two things where they overlap. You have the start of a perfect invite. So think about that one. Complete the sentence. I wish my church didn't have blank. We'd have more people if it wasn't for blank. This could even work for a lack of leadership, right? We don't have a pastor right now. We just have an interim pastor. Some of the best church growth I've ever seen happened during an interim period, because that's when people actually take up arms, so to speak, and say, we're going to be the disciple makers now. Not the pastor who you always looked at as a head disciple maker. You've got congregants rising up to be lay leaders rising up to be deacons and elders, deacons and elders rising up to be shepherds like they're supposed to be, right? Or overseers. Think of your flaw, what you think people won't like, and instead ask, what kind of person would appreciate this?